Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, we're going to be having one of our they're not patented, guest sessions where Scott Hanselman, who has asked me to introduce him as a person on the internet. It's nice and vague, very, very not menacing, but mysterious. Scott's going to be talking to us about the magic that happens really with your browser when you type something in that address bar and push go. Everybody be absolutely delightful and welcome Scott. Scott, thank you so much.
Hello, thank you for having me.
And we're going to do this in a laid back kind of chaotic way. We're going to do this like we do the lessons. So folks can just yell in text. Folks can yell questions as we go, and we'll just go ahead and break them down in real time.
Yeah, I will do my best. I've got a light plan about how I would explain how things work, but I'm easy and flexible. And if you have a question or you say, hey, that wasn't clear enough, can you back up? Or what if you head down this road and hang a left? We'll do that. And then hopefully you'll stay with me and interject. And if you have a suggestion or if you have another analogy that's better than mine, then share that, please.
I'll be surprised if they're better than yours, but I promise to add local color.
You're
Let's
very
go
kind.
ahead and have a look. So I'm seeing some blue. I'm seeing lots of blue.
Okay, so I am running Windows 11, but it doesn't matter. You can run whatever Windows or Linux or Mac that makes you happy. I just happen to be on Windows right now. And then I'm using the Windows terminal. Now, you might use your terminal or Xterm or iTerm2 if you have a Mac or a different machine, or you might be using a different terminal on Linux. It doesn't matter, but I'm at the command line. Now, my command line is a little bit funky because I've made it kind of have cool colors and a little heartbeat here, and I have lots of different choices about what I'm going to use. The command prompt, of course, is something that we don't see a lot unless we start doing development. Most people will go and spend most of their time, on the web like this, and that's their command prompt. That's their world. So for example, here I've hit Hanselman.com. It's my personal website, and we see the HTTPS that we'll talk about. I also have a podcast that we'll see a little bit of, and again, a different URL, a different structure, a different uniform resource locator. That's what a URL is.
Which
We'll
is
talk a
always
little bit
hard to
about that.
remember, isn't it? I always say
It
web
is.
address, but URL feels like a very old fashioned way to say it.
Well, one of the things that happens in tech is we accidentally gatekeep by using TLAs, three-letter acronyms. And if you throw enough three-letter acronyms around, you can overwhelm people. And it's really important to find a safe place to ask questions about, like, hang on, what is that acronym? I don't know what that means. So when you also have English as your second language, you'll hear someone say, oh, go to that URL or that URL. And you're like, URL, what's an URL? Well, all these acronyms mean something. Uniform Resource Locator. It just is a fancy way of saying address.
Yeah.
So in this case here, you'll hear me say URL or address. Those are the same thing. So that's a great thing to call out and point out. All right. And here I'm in my browser. You can use whatever browser makes you happy. I'm using Edge. You can use Chrome or whatever. And then again, my command prompt where I can type commands is a terminal or a console. Those are all the same words. And the reason that I want to use this console is that it's a way to see kind of underneath your computer. To use a car analogy, if you drop into the console, you've decided to drive stick shift, right?
Oh, that's fair. Oh, I'm
Yeah,
going to steal that.
you like that? So, you drive your car, you ride an Uber, you take a Taxify, you find your way, you take a bus or a combi somewhere, but you don't really think about how the vehicle got there.
Yeah.
And in tech, you can be a great programmer, a great web designer without knowing the stuff I'm going to show you. Okay.
Because
You
a
can be a
lot,
great Uber rider without knowing how to be a mechanic. Would you agree?
I think so. We've talked about it in the chat, but I just want to call out this as well. Like, if our learners or if somebody else who's joining us, hey, humans, hasn't worked in the terminal yet or is a little bit freaked out by this, you can still be a great developer still. Like,
Absolutely.
I spend a lot of my time avoiding the terminal,
Yeah,
because I
that's a really
haven't set
great
up cute
point.
colors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've actually made my terminal more friendly by adding kind of colors and status and fun icons. So this won't look like anyone else's terminal because I've made it my own space. I've given it the colors and the icons and the fun things. I've nested and made it my place and provided like lots of little bits of information. And I have details on my YouTube if that makes you happy. And then I'm hearing in the chat that the stream is coming in at only 720p. So I'll make sure to make this as high
Oh,
quality
thank you.
and as zoomed in as possible. So thank
I've
you.
just checked the settings, and that looks like as fancy as we can get it.
Okay,
I
so I'll make sure to
blame
make
the
things as big as
internet.
possible. All right.
Computers. Ugh.
So usually you'll type something like command prompt to find your terminal. I found mine under command prompt. If you use Windows, you can use the Windows terminal, which is free. You can download it from um, from the Windows Store. And we won't go too much into how to use the terminal, but if you just drop into your terminal, all you need to know is that you can't hurt anything here. And if you want to get out, you can just type exit. And then if I press enter, it'll disappear. So if you want to follow along, you can do that as well. Someone in the chat pointing out that the terminal can be scary. Yeah, I really like having a terminal that's friendly and fun. And here in the Windows terminal, I've added some cool icons and I have GIFs and things. So for
Oh,
example,
what?
if I switch to Ubuntu, I have like a cool little Ubuntu graphic down here. And I have a
Oh,
different color set. And I even made it transparent so you can see behind my nice background there. So the terminal can be initially scary, but I think if you spend a little time there, you'll learn. Okay. All right. So I'm going to type clear to clear my screen out, and that's going to put me back at this main prompt. And remember before when I said that my website is at hanselman.com. So I type in hanselman.com and I get this long URL. And if I go and look at a deep page on my website, look how long and crazy that URL got. We've got HTTPS, we've got a www, and then a bunch of segments. And notice that the browser made this white, like it's important. It made it kind of bold-faced, didn't it? And then a long path. So there's a lot going on here, and we don't really think about it. We just type in the URL, but let's break this part down here. HTTPS hypertext transfer protocol secure. Everything means something. And the reason we break these apart is I don't want you to memorize them. I don't want you to worry about it. But if you just hear it once, you go, oh, it means something. They didn't just make it up, right? Like, what do you think? What does www stand for? So,
oh, I love this. Oh, do I get no, no, no. I'm gonna put it out to the chat. So what do we think WWW stands for?
yeah,
Because I'm assuming you're not quite as old as I am, but we used to say these words quite a bit more often when we're referring to the internet.
we surely
Like,
did. So let's see if our friends in the chat can answer that while
oh,
we
beautiful. Oh,
move on.
yeah, and I
Yay!
had no doubts in my heart. It's the
Nicely
World Wide
done.
Web.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, if I just type in hanselman.com, my last name, I'm not going to put the www. I'm not going to put the HTTPS. I'm just going to hit enter. And you'll notice that the browser and the internet figured it out for me. It did the right thing. So I only had to worry about this part. And this is because the internet's getting easier to use. But sometimes you'll hear maybe non-techie people on the news. They'll say, visit our website at https:// da, da, da. You don't need to do those things because the internet's done it for us. But these things are historical artifacts that we're going to have with us forever.
So
The
we've
part I
got
want
a
to talk about first is
oh,
this domain, right? That Hanselman.com. Yes, great
so we
question
had
from
somebody asking, yeah, so sometimes you'll see HTTP and sometimes
Mhm.
you'll see HTTPS.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And by the way this question's framed, Keto sounds like they know what's going on here.
Right. I
But
think
yeah,
we
what's
will
the
talk about
deal?
that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's talk about domains and
Ooh.
ports and domain name services, and then we'll come back to that. And we will talk about the difference between the S and the non-S and why, as a web developer, you should be thinking about that. All right.
Yeah.
So let's start with this part here, with the domain part, the Hanselman.com part. So I'm going to come out to the command line. You can do this too. You can type ping Hanselman.com or google.com or whatever makes you happy.com. And I'm going to press enter, and ping sends out a packet like a radar or a sonar on a submarine. It goes bing, bing, and it sends it out into the world, and it bounces against something solid, and it sends it back, right? That's when sonar goes looking for submarines under the water.
But like a packet of what?
A
Like a
packet
packet
of
of crisps? A
Yeah,
packet of
exactly. A packet of data, a packet of, are you
ah,
there? Can you just tell me that you're there? It's like when you're on a walkie-talkie or a radio with your friends and you go over and they say copy, and you can tell each other that you heard each other. And we're saying acknowledged, I'm there. So I pinged Hanselman.com and I got back a number and a time to life, as well as how long it took in milliseconds, in 1,000ths of a second, to get that information out there. And then, was anything lost? Because I might have, you know, shaky internet, and I might see that some of the packets were lost, and it only heard 2 of them. But in this case, it sent 3 packets, and all of them came back, and there was no loss. So I've got a good, fast connection, and I can see that a number, an IP address, an Internet Protocol address,
ooh.
has shown up here. This is like saying, I want to call Jess, and here's her phone number, right? I want to call Scott, and here's his IP address. We turned this text into a number.
And I often find that not just with learners, when I myself started to first grapple with the concept of where things are online, these mysterious looking numbers were really troubling because you went to Hanselman.com. What's 131072? Who's that? What are they doing?
Yeah, yeah. So this is a really interesting thing here. So Jill has a question: is 32 bytes always the default? So the size of a packet is 64 bytes. That's the standard size for sending something across Ethernet. And this packet size standard, someone decided one day that it was 32 bytes, and that is the standard size. So yeah, that is always the size, because history, because reasons. It
And this
fits
is a
inside of an
really,
Ethernet
yeah,
packet.
a
Yeah.
good fit because next week our guest is going to be talking not about standards for packets, but we're being joined from somebody from the W3C to talk about what standards are and how those happen.
Oh, lovely. That's going to be great.
Oh, it's gonna be so
So
chill.
this name, Hanselman.com, is a domain that I bought, just like my surname. I inherited that. And where I live, though, can change. So I could change from Azure, Microsoft Azure, which is the company that I pay to host my blog, and I could move it over to DigitalOcean. And then this number here would change. So this is an interesting thing. The analogy doesn't quite work. Imagine if you lived at 10 Main Street and you physically moved your house, but you really like that name, 10 Main Street. You're like, oh, 10 Main Street's a great address. I don't want to move my house and get a new address. So I'm going to keep the address the same. So you could think about this as like a latitude and longitude. It's just a number that refers to where you are. But this is the human-friendly version. So I'm going to move my house 2 miles away, but I really like 10 Main Street. So we're just going to point the domain at a different location. All right. And that number there, let's go ahead and take that number, and I'm going to just copy that. And I'm going to put that in the browser and see if that works.
Ooh.
Okay. And it didn't work. Okay. Now, in the old days, this could have worked. In the old days, you could go and type in a URL and it would show up. Let's try that. Actually, let's go and say ping Google. Get a Google number. I'm going to copy that. Now I'm going to come over here and paste it. Ah, look at that. That happened really fast. Let's try this
Really?
again. I typed in the URL, hit enter. Oops. I accidentally searched for that number. I type in that number, I hit enter, and it immediately goes to Google. So what they did was somebody at Google decided, I'd really rather people not type the numbers in, and they redirected me. They brought me over here, and we'll talk about
Ooh.
redirects in a little bit.
Oh, good. I think that's going to be really valuable.
Yeah,
So,
that's really
if I'm
valuable.
going to frame this out, I might say that the domain is the named part of a URL, the named part of that web address,
Yes, that's a
whereas the
great point.
IP address is where it physically lives on a map. I've
Yeah.
always compared the IP address to, I was a teacher for a long time, to cubby holes, like
Mhm,
for your mail. And the address is sort of the name tag that's stuck to the cubby.
mhm,
Your cubby hole might be B6, but it'll say Scott on it. And
mhm.
yeah, that name tag feels like a domain to me.
Yeah, and then that's a great analogy because I can remove the labels and switch them or move them around, and I only care that someone can visit Hanselman.com and get my URL, get my
Yeah.
website. I don't care if this number changes. I don't really
Like,
mind. If you move my cubby, that's fine. I'll go to the other one as long as it has my name on it.
yeah.
Some people care, but for the most part, I don't really mind. Yeah, that makes sense? And then to the point that we see in the chat, this is the domain, and then this is the path within it. So this is the direct location to something else on my blog that we'll talk about in a little bit. And then we'll talk about HTTPS later as well. Now, when we did this ping, there was what's called a lookup. It happened explicitly. We looked up that name, Hanselman.com. Let's clear the screen again. And I'm going to say ping google.com. I can also say NS lookup, name server lookup. Now, this is an analogy that doesn't really work anymore because there aren't any more yellow pages. But the yellow pages was a big giant book, and you'd look up a business and it would tell you the phone number. The domain name services, the name servers that are out there in the world, are all out there to service the switching of a name to a URL. So if I type Google and I hit enter, I get an answer. And if I type Microsoft, I hit enter, and I get, a bunch of answers. So it looks like Microsoft.com is available in lots of places. That would be like looking up a business and seeing that they have 5 potential phone numbers, and you just go and pick the one that works for you.
I might lovingly ask our younger folks who are watching if y'all have a good analogy, sort of an updated version of a phone book, please tell us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Small clarifying answer. I don't want to get too off into the weeds, but Monica Jasper has a great question where they're saying, are packets 32 or 64 bytes? So that's a little complicated. Ping, sorry, let me get out of here. When you do a ping and you say ping something, those are called ICMP packets. They are 32 bytes by default. Packet size on the internet for what's called Ethernet is 64 by default, but packet sizes can vary depending on the network that you're on. It's not super important, but there's some great questions and answers on Quora and on Stack Overflow. But the packet was a convenient size. It's a lot like envelopes or like paper sizes. It's like, why is it 8.5 by 11? Because can you get smaller envelopes and bigger envelopes? Yeah, you can, but there's kind of standards, and then there's ones that you see elsewhere.
So because ping is, well, not because, there's probably a very technical reason. But if we remember that ping is just us saying, "Hey, are you there?" You just need a little tiny envelope to send that kind of teeny message.
Exactly right. No need to send a giant package or big cardboard box. I just want to go and throw pebbles against the wall. Like, or if you're trying to get a hold of your friend who's up at the second floor and you throw a pebble against the glass, you're just saying, "Hey, are you there?" And then they say, "Yes, I'm there." All right.
Yeah.
Foley Rose in the chat is saying, what about the index of a book directing you to a page number? That's a great one. Looking in the back of a book or an appendix and trying to do that. These are called indirections. If you learn about pointers in C later in your career, that's an indirect pointer to something. And sometimes you'll have pointers to things when you're trying to give someone directions. So let's go back to NS lookup. That's another way to look up names. We'll try this again. I type in a name, and you can do this as well. Now, here's the part that's interesting, though. When we
Ooh.
started, it said, all right, here's the default server and its address. So there's lots of different services out there that are going to take the name of the URL, that domain, and turn it into a number. I have one inside my house. So that's actually an address inside my house. It's actually a Raspberry Pi
I
that
was
I
gonna
have.
say that Pi hole sounded very
Yeah,
Raspberry
yeah,
Pi-y.
exactly. And a Raspberry Pi is just a little tiny computer. And I thought it would be fun to run my own domain name server. And that means it's a tiny computer whose job it is to look these names up and give me a number. That's all it does. It's very simple. Now, you might ask, why would you want to do that? Well, you know how when you go on the web and you get advertisements you might not want to see. You go somewhere and they have a banner ad. And you're like, I don't want to see a banner ad. Those might be served from doubleclick.net, which is another company that does that. And I'll press enter. And you'll notice that when I typed in doubleclick.net, I got back all zeros.
Ooh.
Well, that doesn't look good, does it?
I
Well,
mean, it looks like a little ghost face. It looks pretty
yeah,
cool.
it does look cool. So I've told my Pi-hole, my little domain name server, that I don't want to see advertisements. So what it does is it keeps a list of all the numbers that it wants to lie to me about. You know, when you block someone on your phone, they're calling and you never see it. So my computer says, huh, the web browser wants doubleclick.net. I'm going to go and get that. And it hears from the source, in this case, my Pi-hole, oh, 0. I don't have that number. So DoubleClick
Nobody's
never
calling.
hears about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
nobody calls. But I'm going to go here and I'm going to say server. You can try this too if you're following along. 8.8.8.8. That's a Google server. So we've just switched our domain name server, our DNS server, from my local one. Yours will be different. Your numbers will be different. And we've switched it together to a Google server. And then I will try again, doubleclick.net. That's proof that doubleclick.net exists. We know it's a real thing, but it depends on who you ask, right? Not every business is going to be in every Yellow Pages, and not every index in a book is going to find all the different things that you want to find, right? And then our friends in the chat, if you're not following and I'm not doing a good job of explaining, give me more feedback and I'll try to back up and we can explain it again. So let's reset for a second, Jess, and you tell me if
Yeah.
this makes sense. And I want to make sure our friends are following. When
Oh,
you go
I
to your
promise that
browser,
it'll make sense to them, but not me. If
okay,
anybody's gonna get
well,
lost, I
so if
promise
I
to get
type
lost.
a website, I'm going to type Hanselman.com and I'm going to press enter. Before this page showed up, I needed to figure out where it is in the world. And in order to
Okay.
do that, I needed to ask the internet where this is. I needed to get that number. I needed to get these numbers. So
So
before you answer the phone, I've got to dial your phone number.
are there ever any issues where you're asking for an address? So you're giving it a URL, the web address, and it's not able to find your cubby. It's not able to find these numbers appropriately. Is
Yeah.
that a problem? Because and I for folks who've been doing stuff on the web, I know you'll scream when I say this. I'm going to ask wide-eyed and dewy. There are never any problems with domain name servers. Like nothing can go wrong.
So there's a joke, a long running joke. I'll give you a slide about it from
Oh,
our famous American president, Abraham Lincoln, who says, it's always DNS. It's always DNS. The joke is if you're having trouble with your computer, it's probably DNS. Now, that's not always true, but very, very often things go down, things break. You'll recall that Facebook and Instagram disappeared for a day a couple of weeks ago. And ultimately, that was because they removed themselves from the directory accidentally.
so they took all of their stickers off of the cubbies where they live.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. They took somebody just went in and then pulled all the stickers off. The computers still existed. The cubby holes still existed, but there was no way to figure out who owned what. a question just flew in there really quickly
Yeah.
that said, are there any more uses for running your own little local server? I like running my own local server because it gives me a lot of insight into what's happening in my house.
Oh, cool.
So here's a picture of what that looks like. And I can see over the course of the day what is happening. I'm taking control of my network.
Yeah.
I can see who's on the network, how many are being blocked, how many queries by how many people. See 61 objects. Now I only have 4 people in the house, but I have lights and switches and Alexas and all these kind of things that can all be talking on the internet. So if you want to learn about your internet and your network in your home, a fun way to do that is to take a Raspberry Pi, which you may already have, and to put it on your network and have your computer talk to it as your DNS. And I have details on how to do this on my blog. It's called a Pi hole, P-I-H-O-L-E. And then you'll get this really cool screen here that'll give you queries about, look at this. Looks like my
Oh,
Samsung TV is trying to do something, right? And if I don't
I
like
was
that,
not made to live in the future. I was like,
oh
"What are you
yeah,
doing? No, no, we don't need our TVs talking
right.
to
I don't
anyone."
need my TV to do that. So I will probably turn that off. And then I can see Apple. Looks like my Apple phone is trying to do something as well. So when you learn about what's going out on your network, you can kind of take control, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now we have figured out that we turned a name into an IP address. Let's go and actually request something from the internet. And what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try doing a thing called curl. I'm going to say curl, and I'm going to type in Hanselman.com, which is my website. And I'll put in the www and we'll see if this works. Sometimes curl works on my Windows machine, sometimes it doesn't. Let me
And
try another one called wget. There we go.
oh,
These are tools you probably have. They're usually in your path. If you have a Linux machine, curl will work reliably. If you have a Windows machine, wget sometimes is more reliable. And what we're doing is we're saying, not with the browser, but with one of our command line utilities, go and find this URL. And you see, look, resolving, meaning figuring out the name, found the number. Then I'm going to send an HTTP request, a hypertext transfer protocol request, and I'm going to wait for a response. It found the answer, found the response, and it gave me a number, 302. We'll talk about those in a second. Then it went somewhere else. It went to the same URL, except it added HTTPS when I hadn't put the S. So it wants me to be secure. And
it
then
wants what's best for you.
it got my index.html page. It saved it. So I'm browsing the web kind of, except I'm doing it at the command line. It's not as fun as the browser, but it definitely works.
Fewer pictures.
Yeah. So let's try that again with that HTTPS. And you'll see now I didn't get the 302. I got a 200 instead. And it did it in one step. So let's talk about that. The
Yeah.
one
I was
step
going to say
versus
it would
two
be
step.
really nice to talk a little bit about these responses because if I'm seeing this for the first time,
Yeah.
saying, "Hey, good news, 200."
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. We're going to do because like if I say, "Oh, good, I got a 200 back on this website." And you say, "Oh, what?"
Yep.
But 200 is just like, "Hey, everything's fine. I can give you this information if you want it."
Exactly. So they come in ranges, and that can be confusing. And there are dozens of these, but you fortunately don't have to remember them all. And there's actually, they'll start to kind of be easy to remember. Like I think we've all seen a 404 before, not found. You may have seen that one. We see 200, which is okay. 100 is very rare, meaning continue on. 500 you may have seen, which means server error. And these are a series. So you might see a 500, a 502, a 503. So you might see 503, not authorized, or different things like that. So as a general rule, 200 means everything is cool. 300 means go over here. 400 means a client, means it's your mistake. And 500 means it's our mistake.
That's a really good way to. Well, can we unzip continue a little bit? Does continue mean like do some more stuff to get a
Well,
decision?
so continue is one that's not used very often. If you go and look at the docs, it's just an informational thing that says keep
Okay,
going with the request, move
cool.
along. It's not a commonly used number. I would
We
even
can
not
just
even include it.
chuck that out of our head.
Let's toss that.
So if you see a 100, something's weird, but
Yep.
extremely weird. 200's fine. Everything else, things have gotten a little bit different or a little wrong.
So I would say we'll call that okay instead of cool. I would say those are your mains.
Yeah.
Everything's great. I have what you asked for. It's really over here and it'll be over there forever. It's moved and it's always going to be over there. This means it's moved.
So this is
And
at a new cubbyhole, or this is not. This
yeah,
is at a new name tag.
yeah. Well, if we use your cubbyhole analogy, we've gone to the cubbyhole, found a note that said, go over to this other cubbyhole, right? Means it's somewhere else.
And
And
302 would be a temporary. So say, hey, 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 I'm just using the cubbyhole in the other classroom this week or
yep,
today. Like,
exactly.
just go over there until I tell you to stop it.
400, it doesn't really mean your mistake. It means client error. But if I type in a URL, a structure, yeah, see, Platypus says oops. The difference, though, between 400 and 500 is client and server, meaning that something wrong on your side, that means us, I typed the URL wrong, or I don't know where that is. And this means something wrong on our side, meaning a server is broken. So 500s, it's on them, and 400s, it's on you. All right. And then fun little comment here from XCEX. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. 418. There's one funny little thing called
Oh, it's the
HTTP
joke one,
418.
isn't it?
So this is actually a little Easter egg baked into the internet itself, that an HTTP response 418 means I'm a teapot. And it actually has a whole fake hypertext coffee pot control protocol. It was done as an April Fool's joke. And here they're saying that a pot that is out of coffee should return a 503. Let's see what a 503 is. 503 HTTP. That would mean service unavailable.
Oh, well, I mean, that
That
is
makes sense.
technically correct. If you're out of
Yeah.
coffee, your coffee pot service is going to be unavailable.
Isn't that funny? So if you were to theoretically do the Internet of Things, make a coffee pot, put a Raspberry Pi in it, teach it how to talk on the internet, you could request something. You could go out to your command line and you could say, wget, Scott coffee pot. And you would expect to get a 418 that says coffee pot. But
Would
of
you
course,
expect to get yeah.
and then, but again, this is all a joke, but it really is baked into the internet. So it's a real thing, which is really funny. Okay.
So
And
one
that
thing
brings
that
up
was
a really, sorry,
sorry.
please.
So around status codes, one thing that I thought was really interesting is that we've got a status code for 451, which literary fans might get is a reference to Fahrenheit 451. And it used to be not a joke, but it used to be sort of political commentary to say, oh, you know what, these 451s, they're not really going to be often used in the real world.
Mhm.
And then with GDPR coming up, we're seeing that these are becoming more and more common. So if you're in Europe and you're getting you can't have this,
Yeah,
sometimes that'll be associated with a 451 in my experience.
indeed. Indeed. Not super important from a regular Joe and Jane web developer perspective, but the fact that Jess is pointing out that there are a bunch of codes that might feel obscure but may become more interesting is good for us to know as burgeoning web developers. And knowing your basics is kind of like looking at your car and you know what the lights are when they turn on your dashboard. There could be more obscure stuff, but these are your main dashboard lights. And then some of the other more interesting error codes might have you taking it to a mechanic.
Very fair. Yeah.
Okay.
So 200s is green. That's a sweet spot. And we're going to move forward, assuming we've gotten a 200 and everything's fine and everything's going to be fine.
Exactly. But there's one thing that's worth pointing out is sometimes you'll need to log into a website. You'll need to, get some authorization, name and password. And a little bit of interesting context here. I am a diabetic, and I have some implants in my system that will tell you what my blood sugar is. So I'm an IoT device,
That's
and
so cool.
I have a website that will tell people what my blood sugar is in real time. So right now it's a little high, but it will be coming down. Don't worry, I'm fine.
No, I meant I'm not going to look at your password, but that's also not going to.
Oh, my password's hidden. So
Yeah.
here's my blood sugar right now. It's coming down from breakfast. And this is a website that shows my blood sugar. But it's super helpful for me to have that information elsewhere on a little device or on my watch or something like that. So that brings up the question of what's the difference between a web site, like my Hanselman.com website, and a web service or a web API that's going to return information that I might want to do something with. See, I have a little widget here that I'm floating around. It floats on my desktop and it tells me what my blood sugar is. And then you can see here that it's going down. So I'm going to be okay. That is an example of a service that's a web API. Sometimes light bulbs have web APIs, and sometimes companies like Twilio, where I want to text somebody, but I'm going to use a web API to do that. So what I'm going to try to do here is I'll show you a URL.
Oh, fabulous.
That
And I
will,
might actually, after you do this, put you on the spot because I have always been looking for a good analogy for an API.
yeah,
And
I'll
like
show you.
getting
That's
to
a great
oh,
question.
have you? Yeah. Oh, let's do it.
Okay, so here's my website. And then there's a path underneath called /API. And here I can say, give me my last 3 blood sugars. All right. So let's take that and we'll go out to our command line here. And then let me try to curl or wget that. Interesting. Look at that. I didn't get back HTML. I didn't get back a web page. I got back a bit of JavaScript there. Right. And it says 401. So 401 means it's on me, right? Unauthorized. So in fact, I need a special token because I don't want anyone on the internet who's watching our show here to go and get my blood sugar. So I made a special Jessica token just for our talk. And then I add that token in, and I'm going to go and curl that. Oops. Let's close. Let's go ahead. All right. So that's a little hard to read. It's a little bit confusing, right? So I'm going to take that. I'm going to select it. Select that information. I'll just copy that. And sometimes you'll get things all in one line. It can be very overwhelming. Like if I made this really big, I'm like, look how easy programming is.
Yeah.
Very confusing, right? Let's go and open up our friend Visual Studio Code, which is a text editor.
There's a bunch of different types of these. You can,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of
Lots of
folks
choices.
use Visual. I confess I'm often in Visual Studio Code.
Oh,
But
yeah.
if you use something different, or even if you've just been in sandbox environments so
Yeah.
far, it's fine.
Well, actually,
Everything's fine.
just to make that point, because I don't want anyone to feel that they're not included, let's just bring up Notepad to start. I'll make another new notepad here.
Properly old school.
Okay, so here's my string that we've said is scary. This is the one we got back from my blood sugar. And I'm just going to move my cursor around and press enter. All I'm doing is looking around and I'm pressing enter because I want to make it more easily readable for a human.
We've talked about this a lot in the boot camp, the idea of human readability, that
Mm,
computers and browsers, really anything computers touch, they're really chill about messy formatting sometimes. And humans, we
exactly.
don't like that.
Exactly. So here I've got my blood sugar and the direction and the trend, and I've got some dates and some other information. But for the most part, all I care about is my blood sugar, which I want to be able to display in my little widget. So this data here, this information, this JavaScript is not something that a human is ever going to look at. So the difference between an API and a web page is web pages are looked at by humans and their eyes, and APIs are looked at by computers and then maybe processed and then later used for a human to see with their eyes.
Okay, so I've often talked about APIs as sort of a library desk in front
Mhm.
of information that
Mm,
not you as a user, but really you as usually as a service, sometimes, like you've called the API manually, you can do
yeah.
that, but usually something will do it in an automated way. But they need to come and generally authenticate, say, I've got a library card.
Mhm, mhm.
Please give me this information. And you do that exactly like you've done here by saying, hey, I want a curl. I want this type of information from this API.
Right.
And like parameters, I think are things where we're gonna have to I almost announced something that was about to happen for the boot camp. We'll have some news for you about upcoming
Yeah.
programs soon. But for example, if one was learning JavaScript, like the idea of parameters gets important fast.
Mhm,
Is
mhm.
that just specifying what kind of request you're making? So that
Well,
you
so
changed from 1 to 4?
if yeah, so there's a couple of things that you've said there. First, if we look at the URL, we'll chop that up here. I'll just put it
Yeah.
in my thing
Oh,
here. We've got our HTTPS part, we've got our domain part, we've got our API. This is our path. The parameters start after the question mark, and they are just name value pairs. Count equals 1, token equals Jessica, and whatever equals whatever else, right? So this is calling a function over the internet. Those are your parameters. There's your path. And this is all the other little details. And then the only question is, do I want back a thing that I can see with my eyes, like a page, or do I want back structured data? So if I called the library desk, I could say, give me a photocopy of the page so I can see it. Or I could say, no, no, you parse that, you librarian, figure that out for me and just tell me the answer. I don't care about a picture of the page. So you can take the same data back and get the answer in different formats. So if you go and ask Siri or Alexa for something, usually you just want it to say the answer. You don't necessarily need a picture of the map or tell me if Chipotle is open, as opposed to tell me if Chipotle is open and it shows you a photograph of the Chipotle webpage, which doesn't necessarily get me the answer. So this is still over HTTP. I can
the
go and
same
request it.
transfer protocol, the
Yep,
same
everything's the
way we sent a ping,
same.
but
Exactly.
instead we're asking because maybe some of these folks haven't seen JSON at all yet.
Yeah, yeah. So let's go back here and let's look at our JSON. So let me put that back in my clipboard and I'm going to paste it into Visual Studio Code. Now, remember before when I went into Notepad and I manually added all of those enters and everything? Well, in Visual Studio Code, I can click down here in the corner where it says plain text.
Ooh.
And I can say, no, that's not plain. That's JSON. Now suddenly it turned color. That's interesting. Then I can say, I want to format this.
I
Format this
mean,
document.
yeah.
So inside of Visual Studio Code, I can put in a command that says format. And what it'll do is make it human readable. All it did was add enters and spaces and carriage returns for me. Make sense?
And like that's magic by itself. Like, hey, take this potentially
It is magic.
confusing looking information and make it friendlier.
Mhm.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah, that's called formatting document, format document. And you can do that with JavaScript or HTML or Python or C. It's a pretty standard thing that says if the white space That means all of this negative
Empty.
space
Yeah.
here is getting out of control. Put it in some standard way so we can all look at that. And this information then feeds my little widget. So as my blood sugar continues to go down to normal, that widget is being fed. So this goes here, the flat goes here, the system time probably goes here to figure out 2 minutes ago, and I'm picking and choosing the pieces that I want to present that information how I want to present it.
Because you don't really need to include the type. So this is really giving you all of the information it has
Mhm.
around these parameters. And then with the programs you build or with the systems you build, you can choose what you do with that information. It might mean just leave some of it alone.
That's exactly right. Ignore it, or maybe I only need it later. Those are things to think about. Now, once we've retrieved something, whether it be Hanselman.com or YouTube or whatever, the browser will go and look at all of the sub resources, all of the different things. So, for example, when I ask for the homepage of Hanselman.com, that doesn't include the picture or this
Oh,
picture or the fonts. Each one of those is an additional thing that is needed. So if we press F12 inside of our browser, hopefully you've done that at some point, that's a way to see this scary dashboard here. And if you click on the network tab right here and press refresh, you'll actually kind of see all the different things. There's the document with the 200, meaning everything is cool. And then it says, oh, well, I need all of these graphics. I need the icon. I need some JavaScript. But if you imagine this as a tree, right, where the root of the tree is Hanselman.com and then the leaves and all of the dependent branches branch out, you can actually see this kind of cool visualization here where it's like, okay, I got the page. All right, now I'm going to parse it. I'm going to think about it. And I'm going to go get this and this and this. And it shows you exactly how long it took to get what and how to fetch everything. It shows you a timeline. And it looks like the whole thing happened in a third of a second,
yeah.
right? But it got a lot of different things. And I can see, look, one of them failed. So it looks like the Google Analytics one failed. Probably got blocked by my Pi hole.
By a pile.
Yeah.
So, one of our very early speakers, Miguel, came to talk to us about dev tools and about sort of
Fun.
getting to peek behind. So, I'm going to go ahead and chuck that in the chat for
Yeah,
folks.
so let's take a look at that another time. So here's the thing I want to show folks, because I want to point out that browsers do things with graphics, and you're looking at this kind of cool window on the internet. It's very picture friendly, but you don't have to surf the web that way, right? If we go back and we try that wget or curl, let's try curl again. Here we go. I just went curl and I typed in Hanselman.com and I got the HTML, right? So am I browsing the web from my terminal?
Oh,
I mean, you could argue that I kind of am, right?
that's a philosophical question,
That's a
isn't
very
it?
interesting question. So like here I am browsing the web from my terminal and I'm like, all right, this is hard to read. This is hard to read. Did I fetch this JavaScript? Did I fetch this Apple icon? I did not. So I would need, if I wanted to see each piece, to individually fetch those. That's what the browser is doing without us asking. So when you type Hanselman.com or Google.com or Microsoft.com, there's an implied N number, where N is a big number, of other requests that happen there. And that's what we see when we go back to our browser and we press F12 and we hit refresh. We see that first request that we asked for, and then 20 that we did not explicitly ask for.
So, go get me Hanselman.com and everybody that Hanselman.com hangs out with. Everybody that belongs to Hanselman.com, go ahead and show me all of that.
Exactly. Now, before the internet and before computers got really
Before the
sophisticated,
internet. Absolutely not. I refuse.
There was a
Conceptually, I
time
reject this.
there
No,
was a
no.
time when you could use a different browser, like Chrome wasn't the only browser, Edge wasn't the only browser. There was a fun browser called Lynx.
Yes! Oh gosh, are we I mean, you must have just read about it.
Oh,
I
I have a feeling I'm quite a bit older than you are, but we'll argue about that off
we
screen.
can both be old
Let's
and
be
together.
old together.
Lynx is so cool. I remember Lynx.
All right.
Oh,
So
look at this.
look at this obnoxious thing. This is kind of crazy. Let's try that in a different tab and try to make it a little clearer for our friends so we don't shock them.
I mean, just the idea of an all-text browser, shocking enough, isn't
All
it?
right. So let's do this. Um, let's open a link here. Well, let's go. I'm hitting G and I'm going to type in Hanselman.com. I'm going to press enter. Okay. Here it comes. All right. That's my web page as text. And you can see I can move around the links over here, no pun intended, and visit the links. I can actually go to the about page. So here's my about page. And that has graphics, but you can see that they're just listed. You can't actually see the graphic. This could be great as an accessibility tool. It's also great as a low bandwidth tool, but it's still a valid way to surf the internet, isn't it?
Every now and again, when I'm nostalgic for stuff in this space, I like to show younger developers or just younger nerds MUDs.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there were whole interactive online games with the exact same sort of vibe. And just the absolute horror when beautiful, brilliant, exciting young people are like, "Oh, you played that as a game? Like, on
Yeah. A MUD, a
purpose?"
multi-user dungeon.
That's another TLA. I'm
Yeah.
rubbish.
TLAs. Wait till we have another time where you and I hang out and we talk about BBSs, bulletin board systems, and door games. If you want to
Oh,
really
but
see two old people get excited about
we'll
that
have
kind
to
of
have a separate
Yes.
nursing home miniseries where,
All
well,
right.
you remember the blink tag? Yeah, marquee.
All right. So here's a fun thing that I bet you haven't seen because I wanted to come and maybe end with something that maybe even you had not seen before. So we saw that we can do a curl or a wget and we can see the text. Then there's a big empty space and then we can surf the web.
Yeah.
We can look at the web and it's rendered and it looks great. And then in the middle there we saw links, which is kind of basic, but it's text mode. Check out Grouch.
Oh, no.
Okay. So this is going to load Hanselman.com and present it as text on the screen.
Is
Let's
this
compare
ASCII
that.
art?
Yeah, so what it did is it loaded the browser, rendered what was on the screen, and then turned it into ASCII art, into text. This is a really great way to do really, really low bandwidth surfing. And you can see here that it's got my blog and my podcast. Here's my about page with an ASCII art version of myself.
And, like, some folks might not be really familiar with ASCII art. ASCII art's very literally using text to represent images.
Yep.
So, I s ooh, are Kamoji are, like, the sideways smiley faces? Do those count as
I think
ooh.
that counts as ASCII art. That's another whole fun thing. I have a bunch of details about ANSI and ASCII on my blog. And I talk about things like UTF-8 and when things get garbled. So for example, when you end up with a random character in the middle of your HTML because it was incorrectly encoded. And I also talk about BBSs. So if you look for BBS and Hanselman, I talk about how ANSI and ASCII used to work and how you would log into systems that look like this. So these are just text characters that look really cool when you put them next to each other.
Uh, in some places, that's still reasonably common. So, texting in Japanese, you'll still see a lot of Kamoji. So instead of always using
Right.
built-in emoji, yeah,
More
this
like
kinda
that.
deal.
Yeah, more like that. The shrug, the little shrug guy is a great example of a Kamoji. And in fact, if we go back into Notepad, a lot of people don't realize that, again, I'm a Windows user. If you press Windows and period, Kamoji are built into Windows.
No, they're not. I mean, yes, I believe. I am expressing my delight and surprise, not my doubt.
So you press Windows dot. See, look at that.
Yeah, that slightly upset little bear guy. Like,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So those are built in Windows and period. You can get emoji, you can get GIFs, you can get Kamoji all inside of here, all built into Windows.
I hate to sound like I'm always mean to my learners, but I'm always mean to my learners. And I'm going to be mean to a specific one right now because Monica always asks fantastic questions. Not the only one who asks great questions, but for users who aren't querying an API in an automated way, I'm not a service, I'm not a computer. I'm a person who wants to look at an API. What
Mm,
would be the best way for me as a human to start
I
to look at
love
those
that
and start to
question.
decipher them?
I love that question. All right.
Seriously, Monica, right?
Monica's killing it today. Good job, Monica. So the standard answer is to use an API browser. A known one is called Postman. I do think that a good way to find it would be to search for Postman alternatives. Postman is a commercial company now, and there are a lot of great alternatives, including Postwoman, which is an alternative to Postman. The one that I like to use is called Nightingale. It's free on Windows. So let's take our URL for my blood sugar. I'm going to take that link. I'm going to say new request, and we'll just go and put that in here. I'm going to just paste that URL in and hit enter. And you can see here that it automatically broke up the query for you, perfect for what Monica wants to do. And then the JSON can be looked at in different ways. If it comes back as XML or HTML or the raw bytes you can learn
Ooh.
about.
Oh,
Or
wait. Zoom in on those bites. That looks like an absolute headache.
oh yeah.
Woof, woof, woof.
And
Um,
actually, let me, if you don't mind, this is a funny story about bytes.
yeah.
I was debugging a problem recently, and I had a little program I was writing for my Raspberry Pi, and I put it in a folder called good because it worked.
In the weirdness folder. I mean,
And,
yeah, all
and
right.
then I had one that didn't work, and I called it bad. And this is a little bit scary looking, but what's interesting is, look, all the 0Ds are missing.
What?
Only the 0Ds are missing. Isn't that weird? The good
Oh,
one has the 0Ds and the bad one doesn't. Well, it turns out that when I was transferring it with my file transfer protocol application, that it will treat files that don't have an extension as ASCII, which is text. ASCII, that's standard, that represents text, the American Standard Code for Information Interchange. So I felt very sad when that happened. And it turns out that I'd seen that number, 0D. What is 0D? Well, that's the number 13. The number 13 is a carriage return. Now,
what?
keep in mind, it's 2021 here. Why am I thinking about a carriage? So then I asked one of my young interns, what do you think about that? And they said, what's a carriage? And why is it returning? And I said, oh, my friends. It's the part that holds the paper and returns the paper that it carries on the typewriter. And what's fun about that is if you study the history of computers, you'll find out that even today we deal with carriage returns and line feeds. But ultimately, and take a look at this.
Oh gosh, whenever Scott's got to get up, it's going to be something exciting, isn't it? What?
Make the StreamYard full with us.
Oh yeah. Goodbye. Hello.
This is a Lego typewriter that works. And the carriage return takes the paper and returns it, and then it moves. So carriage return is the computer's signal to go and return the carriage, and then feed the lines. So while you'll never use a typewriter or think about a typewriter, it remains with us today in our text files every single day.
And that's something we've gotten to talk about a little bit throughout the course is saying, hey, some of the stuff that feels weird in web development, or some of the stuff that feels weird in computing, or some of the stuff that feels weird on the web is calcified culture, is, oh, this is weird because typewriters used to be a thing, or, oh, yeah, we write it like this because
Yeah,
somebody got this cool idea once. Monica's
exactly.
actually expanded on the question. So Monica's saying, "Oh, hey, yep, Postman, cool." And I may have framed Monica's question poorly, saying, "Is there a way to view the output of an API in like a table? So CSV kind of
I
deal?"
see. That's a good question. So let's return to the example of my
Oh,
blood sugar. This example here is conveniently tabular data. So there are converters that could take that JSON, that JavaScript object notation, and flatten it. So you would search for, like, for example, a JSON to CSV converter. CSV is comma separated value. So if I were to take this information and drop it into something like a CSV converter, suddenly now I have a file that could potentially be put into Excel. Now, I did this by going to a web page, but if you were doing a thing where you were regularly outputting data and you wanted to regularly convert it, you would build a little script or a little workflow that would go and do that. So if I were to go back to my Postman, not say count 1, but say count 20,
Ooh.
now I have lots and lots of data, right? And then drop that data into my converter. That worked out. That worked out because the shape of this was flat. If this data were nested, one additional layer where, like, it was a family tree, then a CSV would no longer be easy to fit. So there are tools like this where you could say, I want to save the results of this not as a JSON file, but rather as something else, a built-in converter of some kind. So there are tools for that at the script, the command line to script those kinds of things. I have not seen an example of how to take a web API and put it into Excel, but I bet you that there is one. I bet you if you searched for Postman for Excel, I bet you
That
they would do that.
sounds like the kind of
Sounds
thing
like a thing
that
people would
somebody's
do.
boss has asked for, and they went,
Look,
"Yeah,
took me
right."
just a few minutes to find it, where someone made a visualizer, and now they take their Postman, they wrote a little bit of a template here, and now it shows up directly into Excel. So this is
Fabulous.
about data going and flowing through systems. Now that's probably where we're getting to the limits of our abilities today. But what I wanted people to see when we were spending time at that command line inside of that funny little web browser at the, let me go ahead and bring that back up just as we end, was to show you that it's the same internet, right? Just because I choose to look at it one way or the other in text mode or not, it's still the same internet, right? It's just presented slightly differently. So the great example that Monica has shared with us is this idea of, I got something as this, but I want to look at it like that. So you can convert it, you can change it. Here we took a graphics and we turned it into text, and here we took JSON and we turned it into CSVs, right?
And I think
Lots and lots
that
of
sort
fun
of
choices.
core concept of,
Mhm,
oh, do you know what? These websites, as we build them, they're structured data. We've been talking about semantic HTML and building out structure that carries extra meaning.
mhm,
But that means that, be it an API or be it a website, that means you've got multiple different ways to ingest that.
mhm.
So in our accessibility classes, we've talked a lot about, hey, people might be using a fundamentally different paradigm too. L- look at your website.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
So this structured data seems like it's just going to come up again and again as a concept.
Well, and even bigger, beyond
Ooh.
structured data, is the concept of what's called systems thinking.
Fabulous. Yeah.
I want to just touch on that briefly because I do need to go and pick up my kids.
Oh,
But let
gosh,
me
of
talk
course.
very, very briefly about systems thinking, and I'll leave us. Let's talk about this. Okay, my toaster is broken. Well, I could buy a new toaster. I could just say, well, this is not working for me. I'm not going to get any toast. What does toast have to do with the internet? Right? What do teapots have to do with the internet? They exist within a larger system. And people who are good potential web people, developers, programmers, can see that it's not just a toaster. It lives in a system. So what's systems thinking applied to a broken toaster? Let's debug that together. Does it have any power? How do I test that there's power to the toaster? Any ideas?
Oh, any safe idea? We'll put it to the class. Does anybody have any safe ideas? I've got some unsafe ideas.
Yeah, exactly. Stick a fork in there. Not a good safe way to figure out whether that power is on. This might seem like a silly thing, but we are doing problems like this every day when something doesn't work. How can I ask a question of the system that allows me to eliminate a whole class of problems? That joke at the very beginning about it's always DNS. If I can eliminate that it wasn't DNS, I've removed a whole series of problems. So our friends in the chat might say, well, could I plug in something else?
Oh,
Use
fair.
Postman, right? Use Postman to check the API. This is not a smart toaster, sadly, but that's a great solution, right? Ask it if it's plugged in. I could plug in a lamp and I could see if that is a potential thing. I could check to see if there's a fuse. Now, this is where things get a little squishy. I just want toast. Why are we talking about fuses? How did I know fuses existed? Someone would need to have educated me at some point and told me that there was a fuse box outside that could pop, blow a fuse, so that I would even know that it existed. A child who wants toast doesn't understand that the toaster exists in a system that requires power. But once I know about that, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I could check the fuse. Is there any power in the house?
Oh,
Go
I
check
feel
the
like we'd
TV.
get that pretty fast.
Yeah, I think you would get that pretty quickly. I think you're right. Another one would be, do the neighbors have power? That's a great example of systems thinking, right? I just want toast, but my first impression is peek outside and see if the neighbors have any power. And if they don't, well, then probably aliens have taken over and there's been an electromagnetic pulse and I can't have any toast because of
You've
the
got a
alien.
bigger problem than your
I've got
toast,
much
maybe.
larger
Yeah.
problems, right? This simple example is the kinds of yes, no questions at scale. So for example, early in career, people, they Google for stuff, and that's okay. But the later, when you start knowing which questions to ask, is my computer connected? Is there DNS? Is a web server running? All these different kind of questions. Can I press F12 and see if maybe a graphic didn't load? All those kind of things. Great comment from our friend in the chat saying that they always like to debug things and they see if it's happening to other people. Is it just me? There's a great website called isiteveryone.orjustme.com where
Is
you can
it?
put in a website and it'll tell you if it's everyone or it's just you. So those are the kind of things we want to ask ourselves. Make sense?
Yeah. And I know that you're going to have to rush off in a second, and I massively appreciate you making the time. You've been so helpful. Where can people find the other stuff you do? So Hanselman.com, I
Mhm.
imagine.
I would encourage people, if I may turn us to the advertising portion of the day,
Yeah.
go to Hanselmancom. I have a couple of things that might be fun for our friends on the chat here. First, I have a podcast called Hansel Minutes. My last name is Hanselman, like Hansel and Gretel Man. And I have over 800 episodes. And a lot of times when you're in tech, you might find a lot of people that kind of look the same. This is not that show. And I want to point out that I can keep talking for another 10 minutes and I'm not going to run out of cool faces. I'm still going. So if you want to hear from people all over
Oh,
the
I know
world
her.
doing amazing stuff, they are out there. I also have searchable transcripts. So I've got
Uh,
over 400 hours. And if you want to learn about the cloud, you can go and search and you'll find not only mentions of the cloud, but then you can click and it'll take you directly to the part in the podcast where they said that and it'll bounce along. So if you're learning English, it will help you as it reads what they said and plays that back to you. So that's really cool.
That's magical.
It
I'm
is
terribly
magical. And the
jealous.
last thing I have a blog. It's been going for 20 years, but check out my YouTube, which is specifically called Computer Stuff They Didn't Teach You. And in this show, I have all kinds of fun playlists, including computer stuff they didn't teach you, like text editing in VS Code and
Git
Git and
basics.
code
Oh, my heart.
pages and what's a carrot and who's feeding it and all that kind of fun, silly stuff. All right.
Amazing.
Thanks for letting me spend the afternoon with you.
No, absolutely not. Thank you so much. And thank you all for having just absolutely wonderful questions. Go and, or not bother, go and chase down, that still sounds menacing. Go hang out with Scott over at Hanselman.com. And Scott, thank you so much. Please have the easiest possible afternoon.
You
We're
too.
going to
Thanks a
go
lot.
ahead and let all of you go. And you all remember, even if you're not in my boot camp, your homework is, no matter what time of day it is, that you have to spend the rest of the day as low stress as possible. Like you got to be as easy to yourself as possible. I will see many of you on Monday.